It's just too dark.
I could go home and get my city one. Might not do that.
Oh,
Because
so
don't
that's
we
the
need to
issue.
refer to the document?
Yeah, you might need to.
Yeah, let me just run, I'll be back.
You're good.
Okay, it's 6 o'clock.
Mhm.
You can use mine.
No,
I can
no,
sit over by
no.
you, we can share one.
You sure?
Are you
No.
sure?
No, I'm not using it. I got this.
Oh, okay. You don't wanna look at,
Mine, Mayor, can you log into yours since?
That's what I was gonna do.
this is such a difficult job.
Yeah, you're so needy.
I charged it up and then I.
Jason.
left it.
You get a big one.
The house, if I want a bigger level, that's what I've done. I got a big one. What do
They
you
just
mean?
said, this is what you're using
Oh.
to me. Here's,
Brian asked me what
We
size.
need-
though.
we
here's
need,
Jeff's
what-
old one, here you go.
Oh,
Yeah, free sticker, maybe.
Yeah,
Well,
so you
I
can-
don't know, they asked me,
Turn
that's
that
what I
thing
said.
around, I
I
want
like the
light.
bigger one. I'm getting too old.
Not like I'm gonna.
It's not nice, huh?
Do you know how to get to the
Yeah, I
packet
guess you're supposed
from the public website?
No,
If you give me this, I'll get it going.
okay,
I'll bring
thank
it
you,
to
thank you.
Mayor, when you wanna call the meeting to order, we're ready.
Okay,
Do it.
I'd like to call to order the study session of November 12th, 2024 at 6:01 PM. Councilmember Elfers is absent. Is there a motion to excuse him?
I'll make a motion to excuse Councilman Elfers.
Motion by Councilmember Bowman
And I second.
and a second by Councilmember Cole. Okay,
Do we have to
so
vote
our.
on it?
Yeah,
Cole.
you need to vote.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimous. Can't do two things at one time. All right, so number one on our, which is the only thing on our agenda, is 2024 Comprehensive Plan, Transportation, Capital Facilities, and Utility Elements and Plans. Economic and Community Development Director Ryan Windisch.
Thank
Take
you,
it over.
Mayor, members of City Council. Tonight is the third and final study session. I'm sure you're happy to hear that. On the Sumner Comprehensive Plan Periodic Update, and we will be covering the transportation element and transportation plan, capital facilities element and capital facilities plan, and the utilities element. And we have our consultant from both Burke Consulting presenting, Stephanie Heinmark, and also I think Stephanie, so it's the Stephanie show, Stephanie
One and two.
Herstein from Transpo. And Stephanie from Burke will be going over the presentation tonight, and then we'll also be walking through the transportation and capital facilities and utilities elements, just kind of the goals and responding to any comments, of course, or questions that council might have. So we will get started, and I should also add that here Michael Coxa, our Public Works Director, regarding traffic impact. Slide to that point. So Stephanie, away.
Hi, good evening, council members. I'm sharing the slide deck now, and we'll start with transportation. Just a quick overview before we jump in. We're going to go through the objectives and planning process behind the transportation plan and the transportation element. And Stephanie with Transpo will walk through those documents. And then I'll go through the capital facilities and utilities planning process, a little bit of background. We'll talk about the capital facilities plan. We'll talk a little bit about park impact fees, and we'll have a kind of a follow-up discussion on that at a future meeting. And then I'll go through the capital facilities element and utilities element text. But I'll hand it off to Stephanie with Transpo to start on transportation.
Thanks, Stephanie. So you can do next slide. So the transportation element and plan supports the overall comprehensive planning process. It's implemented as part of GMA and the PSRC Vision 2050, which has their own regional transportation plan. And it's intended to prioritize the city's transportation improvements and update your transportation policies. And then a key element for this update is to establish multimodal level of service standards, and also with all comprehensive planning, the confirming of the transportation funding and what your strategy is to fund the improvements and implement the policies. So the process that we've gone through to update the transportation plan is first looking at your existing transportation conditions by gathering data that the city has, and also taking traffic counts in the area. Then we prepared a travel demand model. We updated the city's model based on the land use plan for 2044 conditions. So the transportation plan and the land use plan work hand in hand, and your transportation plan is making sure that you have the transportation projects and policies and goals to support your vision and growth for your land use plan. And once we establish what the travel patterns are and the travel needs, then we define a set of multimodal transportation improvements based on an evaluation of all the modes in the city. So vehicles, pedestrians, bicycles. So looking at projects that will help promote these modes and support the growth that is projected in the community. And then we update the goals and the policies for the transportation plan, and we've created this transportation plan document that you've seen. Next. The key element of the transportation plan is making sure that you're balancing priorities and goals. You're establishing multimodal improvements, so not just supporting one mode, but looking at ways to improve your roadways, preserving and maintaining roadways, and supporting bicycles, but pedestrians, transit, and also improving safety in the community. And then we look at concurrency and level of service. So this is how the plan makes sure that you're providing improvements concurrent with when they're needed. So you're not planning a lot of growth and then you have a transportation system that isn't supporting that. So making sure the timing of your facilities matches up for when they're needed. And also measuring the adequacy of facilities. So your level of service is making sure that the city has established how they want the transportation system to function, and measuring that your system is functioning how your goals and policies have established. And then also looking at funding. So we'll talk about the transportation impact fee tonight. So that's one funding source, but also other funding sources that Sumner has historically used, like grants. There's federal and state and local grants. There's developer fees you might have beyond just transportation impact fees, or establishing things like transportation benefit districts, what might be special fees within the city for certain areas. So key changes or updates in the transportation plan is the new level of service for pedestrian and bike infrastructure. This level of service is measuring connectivity in the city and making sure you have a network that a cyclist or a pedestrian can move throughout the city, and there aren't gaps where they come to a dead end and they can't get to different destinations in the city. And then there was updates to your vehicle level of service. Previously, the comprehensive plan had identified a few intersections where you were allowing a level of service E or F because there weren't improvements that could bring these intersections up to a level of service D, which is what this citywide LOS was. But we found in this comprehensive plan the way travel patterns had shifted, how traffic growth had been, and also improvements that were done in the city, that there wasn't a need to have intersections that were an exception. And so the citywide recommendation for intersection LOS is LOSD, and we've eliminated those exceptions. And then the plan also has revised the project cost and revenue projections based on the current project list, and then changes in cost, construction cost, and construction index. And then we've also updated the traffic impact fee, which the city will talk about further. Some of the new policies are pursuing expansion with Pierce Transit. As the city grows, transit is going to become more important. And so the recommendation is just to start the conversations and be in the room with Pierce Transit, so you understand what needs to be done if you want to get in the Pierce Transit District again. There's also prioritizing commuter connections for the Manufacturing Industrial Center. You have a sub-area plan, and so this is just strengthening policies for the MIC. And supportive policies for bicycle and pedestrian modes, that includes establishing the multimodal level of service for that. We've also added policies that are consistent with the town center and East Sumner sub-area plans. So the sub-area plans were completed after the last comprehensive plan. So this element is just updating and incorporating and strengthening policies to help with growth and development in these areas. And then stronger policies on environmental impacts. So thinking about climate change and policies to support greenhouse gas, and then also equity and underserved populations in the community and supporting those populations. I think Michael's going to talk about the traffic impact fee.
Yeah. Thanks, Steph. So as long as we're good to move forward on, let's have a couple slides about traffic impact fees. It's kind of an update of what we've talked about previously, and talk a little bit about the impacts, but I only have a few slides here, so do the next thing. Thanks. So what are this? For just like before, what are transportation impact fees? They're fees that are paid by property developers, residential, commercial, industrial. They offset the transportation impact of new development, update them periodically, every 3 to 5 years, and then also anytime we're doing a comprehensive plan update, we're looking at those fees and updates. Next slide. So previous ordinance summary, we passed an ordinance back in May, I think it was. It's either May or June, number escapes me. But during that time, that ordinance adopted the 11th edition of the Trip Generation Manual. We originally had adopted the 10th. So looking at just keeping up with the times, we eliminated this 3-district model that you see there. And now instead just have one citywide district that is going to be put into play. it updated the project list to match what Stephanie's been describing in the transportation plan, and also adding a multimodal commuter projects. And also updated the per trip fee per the 2024 comp and transportation plan. So the effective date of all that was January 1st of 2025, is what was passed in this ordinance. Slide. So what's occurred in the past 6 months since we passed it? Comprehensive plan, which was originally planned to be adopted by January 1st, is now going to be adopted most likely on January 6th, is the current target. So that is kind of out of sync with our January 1st start date for our fees. New trips were based on housing starts from the draft comprehensive plan, but those housing starts were actually revised downward due to Department of Commerce input. So that decreased the number of new trips. And that, if you kind of remember the calculation, we have amount of projects over the number of trips. And that number of trips really increased or decreased the amount of basically purchasing power we were getting from those trips. So in May of 2024, there was 3,000 housing units, that's the small number, that were generating 3,558 trips. In the new analysis, there was only 1,985 housing units that were generating 2,479 trips. So we were trying to incorporate that new data and figure out how it impacts the fees. Next slide. So we brought some options to Public Works Committee to give them a chance to provide staff some input. And with that, we have a recommended revision essentially. And it's very simple. So number one, pass a substitute ordinance revising the effective date from January 1st to February 1st. That will give us will allow us to adopt the comp plan and have all of those kind of larger documents in place that the fees are based off of. And then so revising that to February 1st of 2025. And then number two, adopting a revised transportation plan as presented. So we're not asking you to do anything there, but really just, we worked with Steph and Burke and Transpo to get the housing start data modified, and then kind of with the guidance of the Public Works Committee, we wanted to leave the TIF rate that we passed as is at a $74.52 per new trip. So we worked with the way that our projects are balanced inside of the actual transportation plan to maintain that same number that was passed originally. What that means is it reduces the allocations that we were showing to those non-motorized projects. So there is a kind of a price to pay for that is at least in the way that it's calculated on a longer term cycle. There may not be as much funding for some of those projects. We're all just attempting to make an assessment of what funds will be coming in from this, so it's hard to say whether or not certain projects may be, funded or not, or if ultimately certain ones are priorities for the city over others. But at least for today, for our analysis, we've determined percentages of funding that goes to each one of those projects. They're just reduced from on the non-motorized projects. So that's really the only change. So you'll be seeing a substitute ordinance later, I think it's in December, that makes the revised date change. That's all I have.
Thank you, Michael.
Any questions, concerns?
I guess in a nutshell, then it's staying the same it was before, basically,
Yep.
as far
From
as
a-
number.
From what the
Mhm.
developer will see
Yeah.
when they're coming to the city, the rate that we talked about 6 months ago is still gonna be the rate. It just doesn't go into effect for an extra 30 days.
And we're proposing February 1 then instead of January.
Yes, that way we'll have all the comp plan and adopted, planning documents in place.
And you got the staff, you guys are good with that?
Yes,
That's what I mean?
seemed like the most appropriate decision to make.
I think as a reminder too, this is essentially doubling our current traffic impact fees and to stay at 100% funded for non-motorized and motorized, it almost triple the fee. So we feel this is a good compromise. It gets us in the right direction and gets us closer to where we need it to be.
And it provides the funding that we need.
Not at 100%, but it gets it closer.
So then would you backfill that funding then with grants, or is that, how does that work?
It will just mean that when we collect funding and looking through our project list, it will be there won't be as much funding to go around, but there might be. It's hard to say. This is all based on that 1,985 number of housing starts. If it's higher than that or lower than that, the whole model, it's nice to have a model, but it's not reality. You have to base it on something. So it's it might be of consequence. It might not be of much consequence. It just
Can you adjust it later?
every 3 to 5 years, we can come back and adjust it.
3
So,
to 5 years.
yep, yeah, I mean, there's nothing that says you couldn't adjust it right away,
Sooner.
but usually you want to give a period of time, see how things are developing in the city, where, from a development standpoint, and then also from a project standpoint. There's usually enough time, things that have changed in 5 years that you want to look it up and make sure you dust off your model.
So once it does normalize, so I'm hearing you talking, you need to let it normalize. And let's say that it was just really in a negative impact in terms of funding. To the mayor's question, you could go back and do it, but you really would want to see disparity in some way before you would go do that. So, but you like to let it normalize.
Yeah, this seems like the right approach based on what we know today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
You bet.
Stephanie, we're ready to keep going.
Okay, great. I think before we move on to utilities and capital facilities, I'll give Stephanie a chance to talk through the transportation element. So I'll share that.
So for council, that starts on page 231 in your packet.
So we prepared the element and strike through so you can see what the changes are. In some cases, we're just kind of combining things that were there before or simplifying the introduction piece. So you can keep going, Stephanie. And we've added policies and kind of update policies related to multimodal. It's a requirement to have multimodal level of service. And so we've addressed this through policies. We've also, to the simplification here, to take the previous transportation element had some narrative pieces. And so instead of having long narratives, we've kind of just gotten right to the goals and the policies to simplify things. We've also taken out areas that you'll see notes of that some of these were already captured in a goal or a previous policy. So we've taken those out too. So you're taking out some of the redundancies in order to simplify this a bit. And if you have any questions or comments on the policies, we can talk about those as we scroll through.
And Stephanie, doesn't the state and you mentioned Puget Sound Regional Council, don't they have certain, like a checklist, some pretty specific things that need to be included in our transportation plan?
Yeah, so there are some of these policies that are directly addressing things that need to be included. There's needs to be policies on coordinating with other agencies. There needs to be level of service policies. So this 4.1, here's where I mentioned that we're changing the level of service standard. We're saying to maintain a level of service D on arterials and collectors. Previously, you had some exceptions with Traffic Avenue and Main Street, where you were allowing LOSF. That, based on our analysis of existing conditions and also the future 2044 with the land use plan, it's not necessary to have these LOSF exceptions. So we've eliminated those and simplified the policy to just be LOSD throughout the city. And this is the multimodal transportation improvements. Multimodal level of service is one of the requirements as well. So we have policies to address the multimodal transportation system. We've also added some policies to address changes in transportation technology and just as transportation evolves and things like intelligent transportation systems or automated vehicles, we've added policies to address those. Five is the multimodal transportation system, and addresses your sub-area plans. One of the items we wanted to address was making sure that the transportation element incorporated into the sub-area plans that you've completed over the past years.
Yeah, because otherwise I'm close.
We also added this equity in transportation to consider your underserved populations and prioritizing improvements with the underserved populations to address social equity. And then another required piece is to address financing and implementation. So that's this last goal. And then the element presents your existing system and then your future system based on what was identified through the transportation analysis. There any questions or comments?
Yeah, Stephanie, a little technical difficulty on our end over here, so I do go, there is some comments that'll be coming up now, so.
Yes, it will. Thanks. I can get to it. So on the transportation plan, so this is Andy's that he sent us, and he wanted to make sure the NM or RW plan, you guys can all see this, includes adding sidewalks along 160th between Main Street and 58th Street with all the new homes. So he's talking about them having an option to get to the YMCA in downtown. And he's talked about this before from someone in that neighborhood. So he's saying, I see that maybe it is included in RW5, 160th Avenue East to Elm Street to Main Street on the plan. And so he'd like confirmation of that. So is that confirmed?
That's correct. That improvement includes sidewalks.
Okay. Can I address another one? I didn't get to see it, so I'm going there. On 4.2, you guys can all see this.
Stephanie, we're back in the element now, not the plan.
Yeah.
Sorry. So, he's wanting to know if we can soften the tone to support this in 4.2 under transportation, to support or promote multimodal so that we have flexibility when we do the budget. He says, I like multimodal, but if the budget doesn't allow it, I would like to retain flexibility and not create unnecessary restrictions in our decisions with the comp plan. What does everybody else think about that? So it says construct multimodal transportation improvements to ensure that an adequate transportation system is in place to serve increased travel demands. And he's asking us to soften the tone to support or promote multimodal transportation improvements. I think what he's saying here is construct says, we're sure we're gonna do it. And he's saying, let's support it or promote it. So it's not binding.
You are required to be concurrent. This is addressing concurrency, and you are required to be concurrent, which means that your transportation system needs to support your travel demands.
Okay.
Well, I kind of thought she just said the word that Andy was suggesting. Support.
Instead of shall.
You could say support if you don't want to say construct, but
That's all I was.
you're required to be concurrent, so you would have to construct them to be concurrent.
So would you support constructing multimodal transportation? I don't think it gets where he needs to be, so I think this has to be the way it is.
Yeah.
That's what I heard.
I thought it was fine.
Don't change it. What about his recommendation on 4.7 where he talks about removing the word prohibit and change it to something like discourage on bullet number 7, he said.
4.7.
And I looked at that too, but it says at the end, except where there is demonstrated need.
So that
if-
does
If
that.
you're demonstrating the need, then why change the top?
Okay.
I mean, that's what I read.
Mhm.
And that's consistent with some rules, regulations we even have in our zoning code. Kind of give us an out.
Does anybody else, his comment around 5.5, does anybody else agree with that? I mean, his logic around 5.5 seems to make some sense.
Yeah.
And just along that line, so in order to become, under current law, back into the Pierce Transit Benefit District, it does require a vote of the people. So ultimately, in that process, of course, you're gonna wanna show pros and cons, benefits, and
Tax increases.
yeah, exactly. Before anybody's gonna vote yes, I would assume they're gonna wanna know what the impacts are, not unlike a school levy or something like that. So anyway, just wanted to provide that information as you look at this policy.
Okay, thanks.
And whatever benefits that might possibly come out of that is negotiated at that time, is that correct?
Well, I think it's important to know what role does this council have in negotiating service levels with Pierce Transit? We really don't.
Don't
It's
have
Pierce
any.
Transit sets the service levels. Our
Mhm.
voters get to decide whether we want to be in the district. We can certainly say, hey, we want this level of service if we're going to support going out to the voters. But what that service level is over a period of time will change, right? And it may get better, it might get worse. It's really outside of this elected body's control.
I don't know about 10.4. I don't have a hard feeling either way where he talked about 10.4. But on 10.7, where it says convert public fleets to zero emission vehicles, so that's everything?
So there is a state law that requires the city to evaluate alternate fuel vehicles every time we make a purchase and whether it's reasonable to make that switch. And that is not only the cost of that vehicle, it's the maintenance of that vehicle and the other necessary supportive equipment, like charging stations, for example. So state law already requires us to have some sort of analysis before we purchase a vehicle.
So would we put something in here then? I mean, sounds like there's an analysis, a process in place. I think when I read this, I come to the same conclusion that he came to, which says we're gonna convert public fleets, because I didn't know that, to the EV vehicles, and all he's saying is, can we add as economically feasible, or could we say per the process,
I would,
whatever that word is?
yeah, economically feasible, my understanding of the law is economics cannot be the sole driver.
Mhm.
So I think you need to say where feasible or
The process.
pursuant to state law.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That you just described. I could see us adding that in, and that would take care of that.
So do you wanna, so that, gets that on the end, is that on the hearing?
Stephanie, do you guys have any other experience with this or guidance that you'd recommend to us?
I mean, you could also say work towards converting public fleets to zero emissions, to soften. But I think it's also fine to add the qualifier at the end. Or you could say evaluate converting as feasible.
Either one.
I like that one.
I like that one too.
So evaluate and
As
convert
feasible.
public fleets, where feasible.
Because that's what we're doing today, correct?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
Yep, we're already doing that.
that's what I would put in then. Thank you. I got in all this today.
10.4, was there any discussion from council on that one?
There
Thought that's what we
wasn't.
were just talking about.
We're on 10.7.
10.7.
Oh,
No, we didn't talk on 10.4.
I thought we were doing 10.4.
Well, he wanted
Okay,
to,
that's wrong.
what he's saying is, could we further minimize the regulations language? Like something like promote primarily through incentives, so that we could retain some regulation, but the comp plan makes it clear that we're emphasizing incentives rather than regulation. So that's what he's talking about, where we say promote through regulations and
Where
incentives.
possible.
Yeah. So he's wanting to flip it, promote through incentives. He wants to minimize the word regulations. What would that do? What's that do? Is it just a nit?
Just, go ahead, Councilmember Quirk.
Incentives
A
cost.
well, I mean, you'd be better at it. Low impact development has to follow such guidelines, and that's all that's saying. So you really can't change the definition of low impact development if that's what you're gonna do. It's what, I mean, right?
Yeah, the way I think, reading Councilmember Alfer's email, it says promote primarily through incentives, like basically
Instead of.
carrot first, then
Mhm.
stick. This is written stick, then carrot.
Right.
Right.
I don't know that at the end of the day, if it's going to change
Yeah.
a thing.
Well, you kind of have to do both.
Right.
right?
Yeah,
I mean,
At
either
the end
way.
of the day, you're required to do a certain amount.
Right, I guess that's
So
what
go
I'm
low
trying to
impact
say.
development first.
So I would think this is okay the way it is myself.
I think it's worded pretty good.
Yeah.
I don't have an issue with it.
Does anybody else have any edits on the capital, the transportation element?
No, but I have a question about the executive summary. The executive summary didn't mention that we get bus transit here as well. It just talked about rail. Is there a reason why?
We don't, the current situation for
Mhm.
transit, we don't currently have bus transit except as a feeder bus to rail. And that's why it's not a full-blown like Pierce Transit service, because we're not.
That's
in
not
a
what our
district.
578 is, that takes us to Auburn and Federal Way. and-
Basically
That's a
sound-
train. It's a train that runs when the train's not going.
Sounder regional.
Okay.
Yeah.
That doesn't quite make sense to me, but thank you.
It's because it goes to essentially the same, it's in lieu of riding the train, you're taking that and it's Sound Transit, not Pierce
So
Transit
back to
service.
29.
Okay.
It's not fixed route as Ryan said.
Right.
It's fixed route, but it's fixed route to,
It's still a
Somebody
regional
else.
transit system, not local transit, so it falls under the umbrella of Sound Transit.
Okay.
Mayor, we good to turn it back over to Stephanie to
All right,
continue with the presentation?
So this,
there we go.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about capital facilities and utilities, and then we'll look through those elements together here as well. So a little bit of background on capital facilities planning. A capital facilities element is a required element under the Washington State Growth Management Act. You have to include an inventory of your capital facilities, projected needs, and financing plan. And if for whatever reason the projected needs cannot be financed, the city has to go back and look back at the land use element and kind of re-examine the growth assumptions. And so Sumner fulfills this requirement through two different documents. Policies in the capital facilities and public services element in the comprehensive plan, and through the capital facilities plan, which focuses more on analysis and documentation. And so the capital facilities plan we've updated similarly to the transportation plan update. We have not tracked changes because it's a pretty big overhaul, but we've updated the plan for consistency with other adopted plans. So we're making sure that the city's capital facilities plan is in line with the school district's capital facilities plans and the general water plan and other plans that relate to capital facilities in Sumner. So we're kind of aggregating information from different sources. We've updated the inventory of capital facilities. We've updated some of the levels of service for general government, police facilities, and parks to reflect current conditions and needs. And we'll look at those a little bit closer in the capital facilities element because they're mirrored in there as well. And then we've done some analysis on what the needs will be based on the growth targets and the levels of service. So expecting the city will grow by X amount. What does that mean for what the city needs to provide? And then we've also updated project lists based on some of those other documents and included some financing information as well. And what we found is that there are deficits expected to occur by 2044 for general government square footage, police officers, and parks. And this just means if the city didn't add any of those types of facilities, any more square footage or police officers or parks, that as the city grows, you would be under the level of service for those items. So it's not unexpected since the city is expected to grow, between now and 2044, but these are just the places that our analysis found that you might choose to focus on when doing your budget and other planning. And at a high level, capital facilities includes general government and police, water, sanitary sewer, stormwater, parks, fire and EMS, public schools, and public streets and roads. And some of these are assets controlled by the city. Some of them are controlled by other entities, like the school districts. But in the capital facilities plan, we kind of summarize all of them and make those cross connections as needed. And then I'll touch briefly on park impact fees. So as Stephanie and Michael went over, with the city adopting new transportation impact fees, those include a multimodal level of service, which includes trail projects. And your current park impact fee includes both parks and trails. So as February rolls around, we want to make sure that you are not counting trails both within your park impact fees and your transportation impact fees. So we're going back and looking at those park impact fees and updating them with current information to make sure that come February, that those two things are in alignment. And so the capital facilities plan is looking at park levels of service based on what the city is currently investing per capita in terms of investment and amenities. So essentially, how much is the current park system worth? How many people are benefiting from it? That's how we get a minimum investment per capita, and that informs updated park impact fees. So we've been collecting data on your current system, valuations, coming up with kind of a total number of the value of the system to kind of get us through this process. And the parks level of service, as you'll see in the capital facilities element here in just a minute, goes into specific details on what that looks like, as well as levels of service for things like active recreation amenities, informal recreation amenities, like how many sports fields and things of that type do you have per capita? So how many will you need as the city grows? So essentially, as the city is growing, you need to invest more in parks to maintain that current level of service based on today's level of service. We're working on an updated rate study for the park impact fees that we'll bring back to you. I think we're working on a specific date, but we've got some kind of detailed analysis in there looking at what those park impact fees could be based on latest information. And then we are also looking at some recent changes to case law and state law in this analysis. There's a new-ish requirement for fees to scale based on the size of a residential unit. So essentially, the state is trying to make it so that smaller units get charged lower impact fees, kind of proportional to their size. So we have some analysis that you'll see in that rate study that reflects that. We're also looking to lower commercial and industrial charges. We've kind of re-examined the rationale behind the current park impact fee, which relied a little bit on trails, like the understanding that employees might be using trails to get to and from work, and kind of looking at recent case law, thinking that if we're just talking about parks and not trails, residents are probably more likely to use them and have more access to them. And so we've adjusted our assumptions accordingly. And then there's also a new change to state law that accessory dwelling unit fees have to be no more than half of the single family home fees. So these are all things that you'll see reflected when we go into this part in more detail, but since we're talking capital facilities now, we just wanted to touch on it.
Any questions, Carl? Yes. No? Questions?
No,
Really tough.
I'm awake.
So we went into the element now?
Yeah, she's gonna give a little summary and then we can go through the details.
Yeah, so I just have this one slide on the element itself, and we'll go through the actual details of it here in just a second. But at a high level, we've got some updated policies to advance actions that reduce carbon emissions and promote climate resiliency. We've pulled in a policy related to one in the hazard mitigation plan around protecting the River Grove neighborhood from flooding. Some updated policies on police levels of service, government services level of service, and parks levels of service, just based on some recent information from staff and on the current park system. So we'll look at those in more detail. And then we've updated some policies to match current fire district levels of service and water and sewer levels of service from those adopted plans. So just pulling those in from there. And then new policies to address regional coordination and emergency response to utility issues, and some policies around equitable access to services for underserved populations. And I think I have a similar slide for utilities, and I might just cover that too, and then we can look at both of those elements together. The utilities element covers some similar topics, encouraging alternative energy options while still accommodating natural gas, encouraging the undergrounding of utilities, particularly in town center, minimizing and requiring mitigation of impacts of telecommunications infrastructure, some new policies on equitable development and access to utilities, connecting residents to existing state and other bill assistance and energy efficiency programs, some policies in support of cooperative planning, and implementing new technologies. So with that, I will switch to the actual documents.
And council, that if you have the full packet open, 406 is the page number for the element for capital facilities.
Okay, so capital facilities element. We've got a couple of new policies under Goal 1 around access and impacts to communities when locating community facilities and services. So making sure that the city is considering these things when citing such facilities, and a policy around encouraging coordination of emergency management and public safety programs. Goal 2 is new around considering present and future impacts on underserved populations. So making sure the impacts and burdens associated with new capital facilities are equitably distributed, the improvements are being directed across the city and not, focused in one particular area, that the city is cooperating, coordinating with other jurisdictions and districts on regional capital facility siting, and that the city is actively seeking input from communities on the siting of such facilities, so making sure that you're hearing from a broad range of the population when exploring a new project, and that you're providing engagement materials in languages most commonly spoken in Sumner. And this relates to some state and county requirements and plans that talk a lot about underserved populations and capital facilities. Goal 3 is also a new one relating to the requirement for the city to plan for climate change. So as you'll see below, there are already some existing policies in the adopted plan that relate to this topic, and we've just consolidated a bunch of them under this new goal. So around reducing the city's carbon footprint by incorporating where practicable green development practices, keeping policies around the city meeting LEED certification for certain new construction, energy saving technology in city facilities, leveraging purchasing power that the city has on certain kind of green building products, a little bit on stormwater systems, making sure that those are adequate to meet urban flooding as that potentially is affected by impacts of climate change. And there's some on trees, conservation of resources, alternative technologies and energy. A new one supporting development of infrastructure for alternative fuels that reduce pollution, and that was moved from the utilities element. You'll see that in a couple of spots here. A resilience policy around making sure there's generator power for any critical facilities that don't have that in the event of a power outage. And then we also pulled in a policy from the hazard mitigation plan around flooding around the Puyallup River in the River Grove Drive neighborhood. Minor update 47.3, saying that the city will update the capital improvement program periodically, since it's not a requirement to do that every 2 years. And then we aggregated some policy language under a new Goal 5 around adequate funding. So making sure there's adequate funding to meet capital facility and public service needs, exploring a mix of sources, seeking broad funding, and then adjusting the levels of service, land use element, revenue sources, or any combination if the funding is not sufficient. And then under parks, we've made some updates. You have a new Parks and Trails plan this year, so some of these updates relate to that. And then, as I mentioned, we're looking at the levels of service for the park system based on what's currently in the park system. And you'll see 6.2, I'll pause because we actually had some discussion with staff prior to this meeting on whether or not it should include this specific number value per resident equivalent. So essentially what this is saying is maintain the current level of investment per capita that exists in 2024, which is this number, $1,652 per resident equivalent. We'll get more into that concept when we talk about park impact fees, but essentially it's a combination of residents and employees at a ratio based on how much time in the day essentially they have access to park facilities. And I think I'll let Ryan jump in, but I think the recommendation is to remove this number and instead reference the capital facilities plan because that's an easier document to update.
Yeah, I think we have, staff has some concerns about kind of locking us into a specific number, both on 6.2 and maybe even 6.3. 2024 value is $21.48. So if there's a more open, kind of more flexible, adjustable number reference to our capital facilities plan, we would prefer that. I'm not sure what the council's thoughts are. I'd be interested, of course, to know.
Well, that was also, and I agree with this, what Andy's saying. He's uncomfortable as well with those specific numbers in 6.2 and 6.3 because it does, could lock us in. So we're looking for flexibility when it comes to budgeting in the future. So it probably concurs with what staff is recommending.
What do you put in there? Can you put a lower number, or can you not have a number, or do you have to have a number?
We were gonna just say the 2024 value is based on the adopted capital facilities plan. Is that right, Stephanie?
Yeah, that's right. So it would just reference the capital facilities plan, which gets updated more frequently and is more flexible to update. So if you find that you're making a lot more investments in the park system and you want to update what that number is, or otherwise want to change that reference, it's easier to change than in the actual comp plan itself.
So what's that mean?
If you're good, we'll bring back some minor changes to this and just eliminate the dollar amount and reference the capital facilities.
Perfect. Okay, thanks.
I think we all.
Yeah.
No.
Recreation facilities, this is again based on what's currently in your system. So we just calculated, how many things that count as active recreation facilities like fields, courts, skate parks, similar. How many of those do you have per 1,000 resident equivalents? Same thing for more informal recreation facilities. So like playgrounds, picnic shelters, open lawn areas, similar. And then just the total park acreage as well. So
Can I ask, is 0.4 average, or are we above or below, or with other jurisdictions? Does anybody know?
this 0.4, I think it depends. Different cities will use different levels of service. It's pretty flexible. And so the way we've defined it here is active recreation facilities. There may be other cities that take this exact approach where they're counting all the fields, courts, skate parks, and similar. But I don't know off the top of my head the comparison. This is also based on how these were characterized in the Parks and Trails plan as well. So that talked about active recreation and informal recreation facilities as kind of two distinct categories.
Do you know if our parks are within 10 minutes? It says 10 minutes maximum. And to me, it seems like that might be maybe 15 minutes.
Yeah, it kind of depends on who you are. 20 minutes is a normal mile walking.
Oh, okay.
And so it'd be like half a mile. Maybe it's a quarter mile. I think in our parks and open space plan, I think it's a quarter mile. It is a quarter mile radius. So yeah, kind of be hustling.
And that's, 6.3 definitely talked about, it's a goal, it's a desire to be that way. I mean, I can tell you, you're down the River Grove area, we have Quinnell Park, but it's not developed yet.
Right.
Right, so think how far you have to walk to get to a park from River Grove.
Quite a ways. That's why I don't do it.
And that pedestrian overpass that we have in the process would change that. It's a goal.
Yeah, so for clarity, 6.2 is what we're calling minimum levels of service. So this is the piece that impact fees can be based on. And then 6.3 is like what your targets are. So if you were to increase investment in these facility types, this kind of just helps the city when you're going after grants to say, you know, we're aiming to serve the population at this level and it's in your plan. So just kind of documenting that as a target. It doesn't hold you to doing that. Okay, moving on to police. The levels of service are quite similar to last time. The only change that was made was this ratio of sergeants to commissioned patrol officers, and that was based on direct feedback from the police chief. So we took that recommendation and changed it from 1 sergeant for every 6 to 7 officers to 1 sergeant for every 5 officers. There's a little bit of kind of wording based on best practices here, but not substantial changes. Under fire, we just added, kind of moved some text from the goal into a policy around supporting implementation of the East Pierce Fire and Rescue Facilities Plan and updated their level of service numbers based on what is in their benchmark data for 2023. Added some policy language under the library, just saying you adopt by reference the Pierce County Library Systems Plan. Under general government, police, and city shops square footage per employee, we recommended some adjustments just based on input from city staff and the police department on kind of how well the existing facilities are currently functioning and whether there was a need to kind of have more space per employee. And so general government recommended going up slightly, and police changing from a per capita model to a square foot per employee model. And then the updates under the water system plan, this is all just coming right from the water system plan itself. So just making sure the latest is in here. Some policy or new policy related to comply with PSRC's Vision 2050 plan around requiring water services for new development. Some policy language around best practices, so encouraging when you're designing, siting, constructing, relocating, closing water infrastructure, that it's you know, cost effective, environmentally sensitive, some other considerations as well. Policy around avoiding and mitigating adverse impacts to water systems. A couple new policies in underwater conservation around implementing technologies that assist customers in monitoring and reducing their water usage and supporting existing campaigns to address and promote water conservation. Under sanitary sewer, just adjusted that goal a little bit to also talk about public health and safety and environmental protection. And a couple of policies relating to Vision 2050 guidelines and best practices around requiring sanitary sewer for new development, requiring development to avoid or mitigate adverse impacts to existing systems, septic systems, so for to ensure that existing on-site septic systems are properly functioning, well maintained, or complying with health department requirements, that homeowners should connect to the sanitary sewer system where it's available, and requiring homeowners to also connect to the sanitary sewer system if existing septic systems are not in compliance. And then we have a new goal 13 around regional coordination. This is also related to the Puget Sound Regional Council plan. And these are also kind of edited versions of policies that were pulled out of the utilities element. So cooperative planning, coordinating emergency response, making sure that messaging is in plain language and any language is prevalent in the area, multiple formats. Implementing strategies that balance cost and benefits for the city in terms of access to water and sanitary sewer services. So similar to the last one, these are around the Vision 2050 Puget Sound Regional Council plan, and then some of this is also pulled from the utilities section. but promoting programs that provide equitable access to these services, providing utility bill or deposit assistance or subsidies to supplement tenant-based rental assistance to increase protection for vulnerable households, prioritizing the use of new technologies, programs, and applications that increase reliability, affordability, accessibility. And then under 15, we've got kind of a similar language to some of the other ones about just making sure that the city is considering cost, environment, mitigating impacts on adjacent land uses and impacts to vulnerable populations, encouraging use of low impact development, coordinating on watershed-based efforts, implementing design standards around water quality and flooding. Under solid waste, no changes, and under schools, just changing the name of the school district, as well as a new policy around working with school districts on school siting to support safe and walkable access and avoid serving urban students with schools in the rural area. So that's everything in capital facilities, and then we have maps kind of for the various facility types.
I have a question about the school districts. You mentioned Derringer schools. Do they have impact fees that we look at? Because it only mentions Sumner Bonnie Lake.
That's a good question. I
Collected Derringer impact fees, I can recall.
There's
Yeah.
no development in Sumner that's in the Derringer School District that I'm aware of.
So then why are they listed?
think there is a small area of the city that is in the school district service area based on our analysis in the capital facilities plan.
There is.
It's a pretty small,
Collecting fees, so it might just be like PSE land or something that's in the Derringer School District.
Yeah.
Good question. We're part of both school districts though.
Yeah.
any other questions before we go into the utilities policies?
Any questions? No? No. Thank you.
So we'll move into the next one. Utilities, there's a little bit of updated introduction. Under goal 1 added, so the current policy emphasizes natural gas, so kept natural gas in there, but also added alternative energy as something the city should facilitate the development of. Changed policy 1.2 from promote the extension of natural gas distribution lines to accommodate it. And then a new policy 1.4, facilitate conversion from natural gas to cost-effective and environmentally sensitive alternative technologies and energy sources. So that includes reviewing the city's design and development standards, developing strategies to enhance existing public education outreach campaigns on these topics, and promoting existing state-level policies and initiatives for renewable energy technologies. A little bit of change on the policy or goal 2 on electric facilities, so making sure they're sufficient to support projected growth. We had some consolidation of various pieces, so you'll see some strike through here, but the notes kind of are referencing that these topics or that language itself has been pulled into other parts of this element. 2.3, encourage underground utility networks in new developments in the city and require undergrounding of utilities where appropriate in target areas such as town center. Goal 3 is a new one. Coordinate with telecommunication services to provide new and cost-effective emerging information and technologies and provide the community equitable access to options and reliable service. Some policies removed due to redundancy or kind of consolidation. 3.2 and 3.3, allowing telecommunication utilities only where their impacts can be mitigated or relocated. and encouraging partnerships to take advantage of the city's fiber optic network. We had some policies deleted that are covered under other comp plan elements, like the ones that were pulled into capital facilities. Also deleted policies around electromagnetic fields. That was based on input from consultant Parametrics. That kind of, it's a updated best practice, and the city really has a minimal role. And there's another new policy below that broadly addresses safety issues. Goal 4 is around encouraging equitable development and access to utilities. So making sure that all areas of the city are served well by this utility, connecting residents to state and other resources that might help them pay their utility bills, or update their homes to be more energy efficient. We have another policy on kind of the siting, construction, closure of these systems, kind of the factors that you think about when doing so. Co-location and joint use of public and private utilities. Just kind of on this topic of co-location, so that just helps minimize disruptions to the public and reduce costs. It's just about kind of placement of utility facilities. One on cooperative planning and some sub-policies, including some related to emergency response. So making sure that the city is coordinated with regional jurisdictions and utility providers, and that language is accessible. And then implement new technologies, balancing costs and benefits to the city. So prioritizing the provision of cost-effective, energy-efficient new technologies to underserved populations, and prioritize the use of new technologies, programs, and applications that increase reliability, affordability, and accessibility of utilities. So that's everything for that one. And I'll pause for questions.
Any questions?
There's gonna be a test.
Okay, what are those questions on the test?
Down on my
Do you have
hand.
the answers? Yes.
Can I show me your hand?
Mhm.
Yes,
Thank you.
the staff memo.
For the changes, were you planning on going through that?
I wasn't planning on it.
So just in your packet, the last thing in there is the staff memo, which includes all the edits from the 1016 and 1018 study sessions that you all mentioned, that we took notes on and are incorporating.
Just kind of showing that we made those changes. Those have been made to the final draft in front of the city council on December 2nd for the public hearing.
Of those drafts, 6.2 and 6.2.3, I read it kind of clunky. No less frequent than during the 10-year periodic update. No less frequent than. What's that?
Every 10 years.
Yeah,
That's just clunky
thank
to
you.
me.
I thought it sounded clunky too. I just didn't
It just-
give it.
So we are on page 433,
Yes,
Okay,
or
I'm
at
there.
the staff memo, page 3 of that.
I'm talking about number 6.
Talking about 6.2
Yeah.
and 6.2.3.
Yeah, but yeah, 6.2. You just,
No less frequent than during the 10-year periodic update to the comprehensive plan to determine whether a parking station can completely provide needs parking in the town center. What that's saying is no less than every 10 years during this update, we need to do this parking study.
Yeah.
If it's clunky, we can,
it's
massage.
no
Sounds
less
weird.
frequent than.
It just doesn't
No
flow.
less than during the 10-year.
this is one of those plain language
Uh-huh.
examples that,
When you vote, you gotta like determine what are they asking?
No less frequent.
Okay.
We can refine that. We can,
We'll
we can
refine
clean
Just
it up.
something,
You
something.
can guess it.
I would, because I don't even know what that's saying to me.
And then the 1.14 from Jason, need to make something.
Yeah, so that had,
I just saw it in there, and you were saying it's gonna come, and I don't know what that is, so,
it's been adjusted here,
okay.
Mhm.
Okay.
so.
It's one of the things where we said change it, but we don't know how. Is that what that was?
Okay.
Probably.
Can somebody figure that out?
It's a lot.
It is.
So as Ryan mentioned, you've now seen the entire comprehensive plan. A lot of pages. Appreciate your patience and all your feedback. It's been great to have the feedback. It is gonna have a public hearing on December 2nd. We do have a special study session scheduled for December 9th, just to wrap up anything that you heard at the public hearing that you might wanna come back and address. And then it'll be ready for your consideration on January 6th.
Are there committee meetings happening in December?
That is up to each committee based on their work, but I know at least public safety will likely be canceled. I'm getting thumbs up that public works will likely be canceled.
Oh, oh.
No, that was a yes, he's
That was
going
of
to have
course.
it. I read the thumbs up in the wrong way, so. it looks
This
like we'll
is
at least-
kinda like, I don't know. It's either yes, no, or I don't
Go
know.
with, we'll probably have,
Probably have public works, you'll probably have them getting a no on finance.
hope not.
and
Probably not have
probably not
CD committee.
So it's just public works probably.
Are you proud of yourself, Michael?
Yes, I am.
He's gonna be the only
Actually,
one.
we will have public works because we need to bring the operations facility contract, so there will definitely be public works.
I figured.
Sorry,
That's okay.
a lot going on.
Yes.
So, any other questions for the consultants before we let them leave?
No, thank you, though.
Thanks,
So good.
Stephanie and
Thank
Stephanie.
you.
Thanks, girls.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
He's-
Stephanie Thomas.
Good job.
yeah, yeah.
I don't have a report tonight, Mayor, so I don't know if we have any agenda setting.
Do we have any agenda issues for anybody? Any
Public
Committee?
safety is canceled for this month.
public safety is canceled? Okay. Anything else? All right. I think that's it.
The finance committee is-
So we will adjourn this meeting at 7:17.
Yes, on Thursday. Yeah, I kinda had a conflict